everybody off. Anyway, as Gina said, this is the second in the series on cohabitation. And sort of, let's go to the sort of a bit of a review here. Going back to the outline, we're talking about the definitions of state-sanctioned cohabitation or marriage. The non-state sanctioned cohabitation, essentially a couple living together. And when I'm talking, just to make sure everything is clear on this, talking about long-term relationships as opposed to short-term or one-night stands or whatever. We're not talking about that. We're talking about long-term relationships. And then going through the historical context. First off, last week we talked the ancient Hebrew and Mosaic period. Today we're going to be discussing the New Testament period, and specifically the Jewish and the Greco-Roman influence. By the way, I understand there is a business meeting, and so I'm going to need to talk fast and make this short, so I'll do my best. And then, this thing's not going real fast for me. One thing, this is not cooperating with me right now. I apologize.
You hold the table out further so it's larger, like we did last time?
No.
Or go and do the arrow down. Okay. Good. Is it frozen on the
Yeah, I think it's frozen on me. Well, that worked. That arrow worked.
That's right.
There we go.
Right.
There we
Okay.
go. Finally.
All right.
And then was just a review of the ancient Hebrew culture is patriarchal, nomadic. They're essentially herders and gatherers, and they became cultivators after Egypt. And they wrote and spoke in metaphorically. And I don't know why this is going to aggravate me like this.
Larry, fix it.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. Emerald.
Do you have your notes?
That's what I'm looking for. I thought I had it. Here we go.
There you go.
I guess that's what it was after. And to go back, and then we had the family and the household structure, the essentially patriarchal, and the sons, underneath the patriarch were the sons, and then the property, and the property included the wives, the children, the daughters, the servants, and then of course the slaves. And then of course the Mosaic law included the Ten Commandments and the Pentateuch. And marriage law was primarily included in Deuteronomy. And then we fast forward to the Middle Eastern culture into the New Testament. In the New Testament period, leading up to the New Testament, we had a strong Greek influence, because between the time of the Old Testament and when the New Testament begins, there was a period that where Alexander the Great had essentially conquered that part of the world and introduced Greek culture. So, and also following Alexander the Great, you had the Romans to come in and take over. And I believe they took over, and the Romans took over in about 36 BC, before Christ, in that neighborhood. And of course the Romans were strongly influenced by the Greeks. They copied a lot of the Greek culture. Now, another thing that was changed between the Old Testament and the New was that that part of the world had become more urbanized and more strongly agrarian. The nomadic lifestyle had pretty much gone by the wayside. It was not as it was back in the beginning. And then, of course, it was multicultural. You had the Greek, Roman, the Hebrew, and also there were a bit of other Arabic and Semitic influences there. And, of course, a bit of a Persian leftover from the Persian Empire. The reason it's important to understand the Greek and Roman influence is because the Greek and Roman culture introduced monogamy to the Middle East. But prior to that time, they were still practicing polygamy. However, from the early Greeks and the early Romans as well, they were monogamous. And also they introduced a spiritual component of for marriage and for the husband-wife relationship. And also women started becoming more than just mere property. And we'll talk about that here in just a bit. And love gets introduced into the man-woman relationship as well. Because in the past, marriages were arranged, and even living together, it was kind of God bless you. Even living together, women still were treated as property. In the Jewish culture at that time, it was still, as I mentioned, polygamy was still practiced. And according to some of the writings that I went through, some of the research I did, Jesus did not specifically prohibit polygamy. He did not preach against it. And concubines were still accepted in that period. And marriage was the property arrangement. Now, in the Greco-Roman and early Christian period, monogamy became predominant because of the Greek and Roman influence. And a cohabiting couple, those people who were living together, were essentially considered married during this time. And that was considered in the Roman period, up to the 8th century. Divorce became less acceptable. If you read the words of Jesus in Matthew 19, 3 to 10, if somebody has a Bible open and can read that passage. I know
What passage?
Matthew 19, verses 3 to 10. I'm trying to keep my eye on the watch here. So.
Matthew 19:3-10.
Yes.
Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" "Haven't you read," he said, "that at the beginning of the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate." We didn't just get married just then. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery." Where do you want me to go?
That's it. I have to tell you, this is, of all the teachings of Jesus, this is the one personally I have a problem. Because I have been divorced a couple of times, as some of you probably already know. And I have remarried. And both of our spouses are still living. So, if taken literally, I'm committing adultery. And so, this is one of the teachings I have a problem with. And this is something Jesus and I are going to have a long talk with about when that time comes.
That's right.
There's the same passage appears in one of the other Gospels without the exception. The exception's in Matthew, which was written later. I think it's Mark, where the same passage appears without the exception for infidelity.
Ah, okay.
We might be all right. We're okay.
Well,
We're
it just
okay.
makes it even more of a stern rule.
Right.
I think there's no way of understanding the issue fully without understanding a much broader set of Jesus' teachings and trying to discern out from the entire set of teachings what is the greatest peace.
Exactly.
And people have grabbed hold of this verse forever and used it to beat people.
I know, because I have to tell you, in the Catholic Church, they would not marry me. And there are certain Protestant congregations who
Only
would
if you
not
had a lot
marry
of money.
Yeah,
They did.
That's
I wasn't going to go down that road.
Well, I mean, they married Jackie on Onassis, but anyway, never mind.
Anyhow,
They also say, Mark, I may be mistaken, but it might be in the book of Peter, that one of the requirements to be a deacon is he can be the husband of but one wife.
that is correct.
And I had a problem with that. And I went to Eddie about that many, many years ago.
Really?
In Timothy, I'm sorry.
I'm,
To be a deacon, a man can be the husband of but one wife.
well,
And Eddie says, I think it's just the way you interpret that. Does that mean you can only be married one time? Or does that mean that you're married to two women at the same time?
I think what they're talking about there, and this goes back to the Old Testament as well, because I believe it's in Deuteronomy, where they're talking about the leaders can only have one wife. They cannot be polygamous because they cannot serve God and multiple wives at the same time. That was the reason for that. He's talking polygamy, not being married multiple monogamy, serial monogamy.
I like the way Eddie's interpretation was.
I do too.
Thank you, Jim.
I mean,
There's all kinds of troubling
It's just
passages in the Bible. Though Paul says that women are more superior than men and should not, because man was created first and they should not teach in the church. But
they will be saved by bearing children. You
Now-
know, so there's crazy things.
Now, if you go down to, we're moving down here. If you look at marriage, the emotional and spiritual arrangement, if you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, now I'm going to tell you, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but Paul was a unique individual. In the fact that, first off, in this chapter, he's essentially is preaching celibacy. He says, only if you can't control your physical urges should you get married. Otherwise, remain celibate. In fact, he encourages celibacy. He says, in fact, if you look at, somebody read 1 Corinthians 7, verse 25. At least he clarifies what he's saying there. Larry, do you have that?
Sure, I got it.
All right.
He said the Lord didn't say anything to me about it, but being I'm the person I am, you ask my opinion, I'll give it to you, and here's my opinion. That's what he said.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so at least he had good sense to clarify that. But correct me if I'm wrong. Of course, he was celibate himself.
Was it?
How do we
assuming
know?
he was.
Well, I don't believe it.
Because that's what he said he was.
No, he didn't.
Yes, it is.
No.
Well, he did.
He was at that
He
time.
was divorced.
Okay.
I'm convinced he was a divorced person guilty.
I've been married.
You couldn't be a good Jew in good standing and not have a wife and a male son.
That's
You
right.
could not be a part of the Sanhedrin or
Very
you're not married.
good.
And he says, as far as his credentials, he said, I'm the tribe of Benjamin, of the Israelites. And he goes on and on and says, if you want to stack your credentials up, I'll stack mine higher.
Right. I recall.
And when he was on the road to Jerusalem and Damascus, and the bright light shined and blinded him, that was part of the dilemma. He could not go back home because he had now converted to Christianity. He no longer was a Jew. And that was his dilemma, whether I go out and try to figure it out, pray about it, or go back home and renounce Christ.
He was a Christian Jew.
He was still a Jew.
Well, he was Jew by race, but not a Jew by faith. And there's a huge difference in that. They don't grow on the same coconut tree.
That's true.
But even today in Orthodox Judaism, you convert to another religion or faith, they have a literal burial for you. And if you read Corinthians from the guy with the broken heart with family, he gave up to follow Christ. It reads totally different. Okay, that's my concern.
Oh, I'm glad you
I
clarified
would
it.
disagree with that, and that's all right. But I'm convinced that's behind all that he writes. And it reads different.
Well, it kind of makes me scratch my head wondering why he preached celibacy or advocated celibacy.
It's a whole lot easier not to get married and not have that pain than to get married.
You also don't have that distraction. If you are totally committed to God, and your mind and your heart is totally committed to God, and you have then this distraction of a marriage, which takes attention, takes work,
Yeah.
takes part of your emotion, takes a lot of your time. That's emotion, time, and heart you don't have for God.
Well, that's essentially what Paul was saying here in Corinthians, is the fact that, choose one or the other. And he understands that, the physical needs are going to be there. And if you can control them, fine. If not, fine. Do what you have to do. But he didn't say that very enthusiastically. Essentially, his first choice was celibacy.
You hit on something a while ago on this verse. He says in 4 different times in the books of Corinthians, he said, Lord didn't give me any wisdom on it, but I'm going to tell you my opinion. It's his words, not mine. And so you have to be careful when you read Paul and try to build a theology, particularly on women and women in relationship to the church and so on. Yours theology, it doesn't have, it goes back to Romans and not in Corinthians.
It was really interesting, Mark, if you, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John were not the first books of the New Testament.
No.
If you took the first 7 letters that Paul wrote and put them in sequence, the guy Lord was there on the Bible. If you took them in chronological sequence, you get a whole different picture of Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really fascinating.
I'm sure.
It's fascinating. And you get a whole different picture of marriage. In fact, this book over here and this book over here, because it's literally, if you take those first 7 books, which chronologically they were written like that, right there, correct. Then you get a whole different picture. I mean, just, for example, Revelation was the last book, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
And I think there was an urgency with the first century Christians because they all thought Jesus was coming back at any time.
Correct.
And so they didn't think it was going to go on for 2,000 or 2 millennia. And so they were really urgent about getting it out, and maybe that might be why he promoted celibacy too. I don't know.
Pardon?
Hmm.
10:31. What time do I need to get everybody out of here?
The meeting starts at 10:40.
So maybe 5 more minutes.
It's okay, I'll talk fast. Okay, another verse here is Ephesians 5:25-20-28. Has anybody got that? Did the Bible leave? This is I'm not going to be able to get to the real point of this, but I guess I can talk fast next week.
Ephesians 5, what are we doing? 28?
25 to 28.
28. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Is that it?
That's it.
28.
Yes, ma'am. Here we are talking about the introduction of the emotion of love in the man-woman relationship. Prior to that, the marriages were arranged by the father and the fathers of the bride and groom. Whether there was love there or not, well, as Tina Turner says, what's love got to do with it?
Yeah.
And really, it was hoped that eventually a husband would love his wife, or vice versa. But if it didn't happen, it didn't happen. Here, Paul is, and this I totally agree with Paul, is the fact that a husband and wife should show love to each other.
Happy Valentine's Day.
That's right. As Christ loved the church
Yes, ma'am. As Christ loved the
and
church.
was willing to give his life for us.
Exactly. I'm not really going to get into the chance of, and I guess one thing that I need to sort of emphasize here, if you go back up here, a cohabitating couple were considered married. Essentially, cohabitation that was one reason I wanted to cover the 2 main elements of cohabitation: state sanctioned and non-state sanctioned. Essentially, once a couple lived together for a while, essentially it became a state sanctioned relationship and became equivalent to marriage. I'm talking New Testament times now. So you have to look at, you're shaking your head there. Huh?
I don't believe it.
Well, this was the New Testament times. You cannot apply 21st century attitudes towards first century Israel and first century Christians. They had totally different attitude, totally different outlook. And as far as concubines were concerned, there's no clear prohibition or mention in the New Testament. There's nothing that says a man cannot have a concubine. And looks like that my time's up.
Yeah, we're
My time's up. Okay, folks, thank you very much. I hope I didn't scare you or bore you too bad. Somebody real fast say a quick prayer and we'll be dismissed.
Dear Lord, be with the meeting we're about to attend. Guide us in the way you would have us go. Be with us through the week. Be with those who are not able to be here. And especially be with those who do not know you and need to. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mark.
Thank
Are you
you.
going to be able to continue next week?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
Oh,
good.
yeah. Oh,
Good. Oh, goodness.